Good evening again, or good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome back to Beyond Room 313 Symposium. Tiffany and Jason is here with us, and we have returning Gary Vasey. Now, you had Gary on before. He's an author, musician, all-around interesting guy. He's a fascinating YouTube channel if you haven't gone onto it yet. And Gary contacted me about a couple of months ago, and he asked me about the concept of liminal people. And I'd never heard it phrased in that way, and he had a video about it. Now, liminal people is something I've been interested in all my life, and it kind of ties in very well with, gosh, lots of things we could probably bring into, maybe even Men in Black, other issues, maybe the NPC thing that's taken over the world today. But I think we've achieved a lot of focus in the last 3 years of madness, or two years of madness and social madness, that liminal people, and I'll allow Gary to explain what they are, will probably be a very interesting subject to you. And something tells me a growing Fortean paranormal and esoteric subject in the future. I don't know why, it's just a hunch I have, but I think what Gary has to share here is very important and very enlightening. So welcome back, Gary. It's great to see you again, and thank you very much for giving us an hour or so of your time. I hope you're well.
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you, and happy to be back. Nice to see you all.
Great.
Yeah, it's been an interesting couple of years, but we've got through that bit and into the next.
Exactly, and we got, and like I said, I always say the greatest education ever, and that includes a Fortean and sort of occultic education. Go on, tell us about the liminal people experience and what it means to you, or theories about it. We'll kick off with that.
All right, so a little bit of background maybe first. I've been for the last, 10 years writing, collecting ghost stories of the paranormal via a website and just talking to people. Became a sort of passionate interest to collect these weird stories. And so I've written a lot of books, paranormal true story type books. And over that period of time, what would happen, I'm also one of these people that grew up seeing ghosts and poltergeist and has a degree of innate psychism, I suppose. So I had a few experiences of my own, things like the old hag experience on a train to Germany a couple of years back, and just things that happened to me. And then I would rummage along through all these stories to try to find anything similar and do sort of themed books. And over a period of time, I started to think, well, things like black-eyed kids and shadow people and these sort of paranormal phenomena, there's an aspect to them that they are only seen by the person who sees them. So there's many stories about black-eyed kids where all hell is breaking loose. They're knocking on the door, they're screaming, let us in, that the occupant is terrified. But nobody else in the neighborhood saw or heard a thing. It's as if the black-eyed kid only exists in the reality of the person having the experience. And we can come back to this later. So on the side, I started dowsing. And this was about 3 years ago after encountering a strange shaman just around the corner underneath Spielberg Castle here in Brno, Czech Republic. And I started dowsing. Don't ask me why, I just did. And I started dowsing earth energy lines and found all kinds of lines all across Moravia, through Brno. I made it my little pet project every spare minute I had to be dowsing and mapping these lines on Dowsing Mapper, an app that you can get for your mobile phone. And I started writing about this. And it was one day about a year ago that I was out dowsing. Now, to douse properly, you kind of have to put yourself in a meditational state of mind. So I'm walking along, I've got my sticks out front, but I'm really thinking of nothing. It's just a sort of, or I'm just thinking of something like the traffic's busy or whatever. And I'm not really focused on what's going on with the sticks. And it's that sort of frame of mind that the more you do this, the more you get into it. And I'd been having some very strange, sort of bizarre experiences anyway, just doing this dowsing. Like everywhere I went, I would find these little white feathers. And then they started to become blue feathers and grey feathers. And I would pick them up. I have pocketfuls of these little feathers. I mean, okay, it could be, a little bird got killed and there's some feathers. But not in the middle of nowhere, not everywhere that I went on a line. And then I began to notice butterflies all the time, landing on me, 3 or 4 at a time. I have video on my YouTube where I'm dowsing at a place called Mikulčice, which is an old Slavic archaeological site. And there are literally hundreds of butterflies dancing in my path. So I was having that kind of a sort of experience. And this particular day, I'm on a busy street coming out of a village, and I'm walking up this hill with my rods. And there's a couple of houses on the side, and then on the other side, there's a drop into a valley. And I see this old lady, maybe 80-ish sort of age, and she's got lots of plastic bags. So I'm thinking homeless person. And she's got this little seat that she's put out, and she's at somebody's hedge, private garden hedge, and she's fiddling around under the hedge, kind of into the back garden. So this caught my attention because I'm thinking, well, what the hell is she doing, you know? And I'm still dowsing away, and I'm walking, and I find a line. And so I concentrate on counting the paces of the line, and I turn around, and there's no sign of this woman. She's just completely disappeared. Plastic bags, seat, the lot. So I stop dowsing, and I go back, and I'm looking all over for this lady, and I cannot find her. There's no sign of her, nowhere, not to be seen. And the hairs on the back of my neck started to go up, you know. So a bit later on, I drive back into Brno, and I'm tracking another energy line. I kind of went out on one line and came back on another. And I'm going through this area, which is basically an old, probably a communist type factory that's disused. And there's a lot of garages and lockups, and it's really derelict, but obviously used to store things. And I see what for all the world looked like Santa Claus sat down in front of one of these garages, big white beard, mustache, long white hair, dressed in strange outlandish clothes, not red clothes, but strange outlandish, with lots of bags. And I thought, aha, another homeless person. And I'm dowsing away, and the same thing happened. After about a minute or so, I turn around, no sign of the guy, just completely disappeared. So again, I start looking all over the place, and I couldn't find them. So I got home that evening, and I start thinking about all of the strange weirdness that comes with the dowsing experience. And I thought, well, I wonder if what's going on is as I'm dowsing, I'm getting into a state of mind, a meditational state of mind, where, if you want, I'm opening up my bandwidth, perception bandwidth, a bit more than perhaps normally would be, and I'm catching people or beings that exist on the edge, on the liminal boundary, or on the periphery of our reality. And so I started to, well, that's when I think I sent you an email or something, because I was just like intrigued by this whole idea. And then I went back to the black-eyed kids and shadow people, and I started to examine these stories more. And also the stories of the third person, you know, where an angel comes apparently and helps somebody that's in trouble in a car accident or whatever. And I discovered that there's this pattern that these people are only seen and heard by the person having the experience, or maybe one or two others. The person having the experience is always in a state of heightened awareness, be it fear or shock or meditational experience. And I began to think, well, what if these beings existed in our reality, but like you have frequencies and, you know, wavelengths, and we can only see that much of the spectrum. What if sometimes you can actually broaden the spectrum a bit and catch liminal people on the upper end and the lower, and liminal beings on the lower end of that frequency that you're able to get to? And as I've continued to douse, all kinds of very strange things continue to happen. Just this last weekend on Sunday, my girlfriend and I, Eva, we went out looking to extend. We're following these major lines that we discovered across the Czech Republic. And there's some very interesting vortexes where these two lines cross. It's a bit like the Michael and Mary line. It would be the equivalent type lines of the Mary and Michael line that go across from Cornwall to East Anglia. We've called it the Templar alignment, the Mokosh and Perun lines. And we're trying to track them across in between these vortices and Templar sites that we found along the way. And this Sunday, we're out there, and we don't really know where we're going. We've got a rough sort of direction, but the way the Czech countryside is there are very few roads and lots of forest and open land. And so trying to track these things, you would think, would take a lot of time and effort and a lot of diligence. And we just kept parking the car, getting out, dowsing, and finding the line right where we'd parked. And on a couple of occasions, I would say something like, the male line seems to like tops of hills and oak trees. We're on a flat top of the hill. Let's stop here and see. And hey, presto, we're in the line. But what's really weird is in two sites, we found, when we dowsed for the middle of the line, where the middle of the line was according to the dowsing, we found laid on the floor little designs that appear to have been placed there that pointed in the direction of the line and were obviously made by somebody who I suspect to be none other than this shaman guy that I met 3 or 4 years ago. So I'm beginning to think I'm going a bit mad because I feel like I'm being guided or encouraged along a particular path. I'll shut up now because I've said enough, but that's roughly what's been going on and what this liminal thing is.
Well, you answered a question for me in that way. Just before Jason gets in, I just want to throw this in there. And this is one of the reasons I'm glad you came on. I had an experience with a person, entity, whatever, that lasted about 15 years in Dublin from the time I was a teenager to my 30s. And it was a person who would come up to you in the street and go, I know you, who are you, where are you from? And quite frightening and intimidating. I know you, how old are you, where are you from, I know you. And one time it happened when I was going to college at night in a place called the Liberties in Dublin, which is like the old Viking city. And it was a terrifying experience. And the last time it happened, it stopped because I didn't make eye contact with the individual. I was looking in a shop window and I heard, I know you got the same voice. It was the same voice, but coming from different bodies, different people. And they were not right. They didn't look right, these people. There was something hostile and nasty about them. And you've answered a question there that bothered me. In all the times they appeared, I was under stress. If it wasn't from worrying about exams, it was the being down or upset about something. So I think you've nailed it there. It was almost like me being in a state of anxiety or hurt opened up this portal and this thing came through. I think so. Yeah. I really do.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, so Gary, I wanted to ask you along the lines of what Thomas was talking about there with these entities. You mentioned in one of your interviews the idea about entities attaching to people through personality traits or through kind of as psychic parasites feeding off of stress, anxiety, and depression. Now, do you think that this could be a similar kind of thing here where you don't necessarily have entities attaching negative parasitic entities, but there can be kind of helper entities that come along too, like these liminal people you talk about that, these portals open up and like you're saying on one side of the boundary, there's one type and on the other side of the boundary, there's
exactly.
Lower types. Yeah.
Think about it as a radio and you're tuning in. And you've only got so much, your radio is a cheap radio, and you've only got so much AM, right? And you can't listen outside of that. And then you find another radio that actually extends a bit further both directions. And all of a sudden you find new things that you never knew existed before. And I liken it to that. I see that we can see and sense so much in a spectrum, and we get into a state of mind where that spectrum is broadened slightly. And then we can have these experiences with all kinds of different entities. On one end of the scale, you would assume that we're moving up the vibrational scale. So we're going to meet angelic and spiritually evolved beings, you would hope. And going back the way, you're getting more dense, more physical, and more into so-called, if you want, demonic or dark. And that's where I think the black-eyed kids and the shadow people reside. And on the other side, those people that have those experiences where they're in trouble and some person shows up and helps them, and then they turn around when the things is over to thank them and they've disappeared and no one else saw them. That's the kind of angelic side of this. And it's become for me sort of a predictive thing as well, so that there's a mechanism whereby, for example, people talk about waking up, what's the word? Sleep paralysis. Yeah, thank you. Sleep paralysis. And if you talk to the average materialistic scientist, he'll say, well, you have the old hag experience because of the sleep paralysis. I would, and I am a PhD scientist, by the way. So I think there's more to it than this. I think that actually it's the entity that puts you in sleep paralysis in order to basically have its way with you. And I think that it's using fear and it's using strong negative emotions in order to feed off of you. So I think that some of these entities see us as a source of energetic food, if you want, sustenance, and they use things like fear, anger, lust, this kind of thing, in order to get what they need from us. And they exist on this sort of peripheral or liminal part of our reality. And sometimes we inadvertently let them in because of our mood or our mental state, which opens the bandwidth a little more so that we can actually see them and interact with them. But it's only us, usually, that sees them. And this was the trigger for me, because I had so many black-eyed kid stories where only person that saw the black-eyed kid was the person having the experience. Now, this often takes place late at night, early hours of the morning, but such a noise, such a racket, and such a lot going on that you're very surprised that other people didn't wake up and see this. And so then you say, oh, well, was it an imaginary experience? But a lot of these black-eyed kids' experiences, there is physical evidence for the existence of the kid being there. So in one instance, one of the kids was eating an apple on the doorstep. And once they had left and the guy opened his door, the kids were long gone, but there was a half-eaten apple on the doorstep. Another one took place in a snowy day and the footprints were still there. But only the person having the experience saw the entity.
There's a similar thing called the bogus social worker. That was they were like sort of like a Men in Black or Black-Eyed Children variant that plagued England in the 1990s, where two people that looked identical showed up all over England asking to be let in to see the children. And it was a terrifying, we've got a video on this channel about it, and it's a fascinating story. And in all the cases, the woman was at home and the husband was out working, and they were insistent on being let in, just like the black-eyed children. Another thing about the black-eyed children that I find interesting is, I think it was 14 Times, did a very good article on them. This is years ago now. And they said that people staying alone in hotels, particularly like traveling business people who were probably lonely and away from home, were more likely to experience the black-eyed kids outside their knocking on their hotel room door. And I found that ties in with your anxiety thing as well.
Yeah. And the other thing that I noticed as well was black-eyed adults. And quite often these would look like homeless people. And having spent 13 years living in Texas, I'm very familiar with Walmart, and half of the stories seem to take place in Walmart parking lots, where, for example, the lady would be walking through the parking lot and she'd see what she thought was a homeless person, and this person would wait and then address her by her first name and say something to her, and she'd turn around and see the eyes were completely black. And it would scare the living daylights out of them. And this was a black-eyed adult, not a black-eyed child. And for some reason, they seem to like Walmart parking lots, just FYI.
I wanted to go back a little bit to what you said about the night hag experience. I used to have those consistently when I was young. I had a lot of anxiety and stress when I was growing up. So that was a key point that you brought up for me. And what used to happen to me is it would always start with, there was right outside my window, we had like a bed of rocks with some plants or whatever in it. And it would always start with sounding like someone was walking across the rocks. So I'd get up and I'd check, and, not my cat, not a person, nothing like that. And then I'd get back in bed and I'd fall asleep. And then I would wake up, but not all the way. But I was awake enough to know that I couldn't move my body at all, and it felt like there was a boulder sitting on top of my chest. But it went even further than that. It felt like my legs were being broken, like the bones in my legs were being shattered. But even my vocal cords were paralyzed. The only thing I could do would, just tears. That would be the only physical thing my body could do. And it happened for years. And then the other event that would usually accompany that, not all the time, but frequently, my younger siblings were in the next bedroom over. And a lot of times when this would happen, when it would start to sort of release me from that, I could feel it go through the wall. And then in my mind's eye, it was like this old, like in movies and stuff, the old witch hag, the long bony fingers and, nasty hair and whatever. And she would sit on top of them and just rip their astral bodies to pieces. And they would be screaming. And of course, my parents would, shut up, go to bed, stop crying. But it was different than that. And so I would usually go into their room after everything was over and just like lay there with them. And it was terrifying. And they sort of remember it. They're almost 5 years younger than me. So, and we were all a little bit younger. So they have some memory of it, but I remember it so viscerally.
Yeah, the one I had was really also interesting because it happened twice in succession. The first time, the train jolted or something and woke me up. I was in like a sleeper compartment going from Vienna to Hamburg. And the train just jolted and it threw me out. And I'd had the same thing as you, this feeling of couldn't breathe, something sat on my chest. Looked like a sea creature, hag type thing. And what appalled me was that there was definitely a sexual connotation to it, and I wasn't feeling very, very happy about what this entity seemed to want to do with me. So I got up and I went for a walk up and down the train, had a cup of coffee, chatted to some people, and I went back to my compartment, which was the first class private compartment. There's just me in it. And I sat down and I looked up, and in the luggage rack, I could see this mist, this grayish mist. And I thought to myself, oh gosh, it hasn't gone. So I actually did a couple of protection things that I am aware of and hoped for the best. And it happened again straight away. Straight away, I was in sleep paralysis with this thing. And this time it really was a really scary experience. And once again, I could hear... I could hear the people talking next door. I could hear, it was almost like your hearing is even better than it would normally be, because I could hear people talking next door. I could hear a conversation with the train guard going on up the corridor. And then again, I guess the train hit a jump or something, and I came out of it. And I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night because I could still see the grayish, whitish mist sitting up in the luggage rack. And I knew... That's when I decided, this isn't sleep paralysis experience. This is an entity using sleep paralysis to cause me to go into some kind of energetic state where they can take energy from me, whatever it is they're looking for, fear or whatever, lust or whatever, I don't know. But it was absolutely terrifying, and it made me write a book on the experience and find a bunch of stories and go looking at all the psychology and all the science behind it. But I think that scientists these days just don't want to admit. It's ridiculous, really, because if you look at the quantum world, it's miraculous and magical. But they want to be so materialistic and matter of fact. And I think that they're doing us a disservice, actually, by not acknowledging that there are things going on and always have been that we need to be more aware of.
Just like Thomas was saying in his video earlier today about, there wasn't that long ago a differentiation between science and magic. They were the same thing. They were the same technology. As opposed to the scientism of today. It's not even science anymore. It's a scientism cult.
Yeah, unfortunately, I did my PhD back in the 80s, and I'm a geologist originally, so I did geology. And I worked under a guy called, I'll mention his name, Professor M.J. Russell. He ended up as a chief scientist at NASA, looking for alien life in the universe. And he taught me a very rigorous way of conducting science and what science was. And it's not what purports to be science today. Science is a raucous debate. Science is about creating hypotheses and knocking them over. It's not about having a religious idea and a fervor about it and defending it no matter what. That's not science, that's politics and religion.
Yeah, you see that so much with the ancient sites. When the antiquarians in the 1700s were dating them, because they were in colleges, particularly in England, but also in France, they were sponsored by the church. That's why we have all these Mary Magdalene College and Christ Church and all these other things in Oxford and Cambridge. They could not literally date them beyond the biblical timeline because they had to fit in the biblical timeline. And this is why we have a completely distorted view of the chronology of ancient history. It's completely wrong, and it's based on the fact that from the Enlightenment, actually, unfortunately, which when you think about it, shouldn't have happened. But from the period of the Enlightenment, and just before that, the likes of Stukely and all these people, Aubrey, were having to date them according to biblical timelines in order to not piss off the church founders in places like Christ Church and Magdalene College and all these places, and Trinity and all over the Sorbonne in France. And it's still there. That legacy has been catastrophic for anyone interested in studying ancient sites, because you're still, I mean, even as much as I like Neil Oliver, he's really excited today about the other day there about the new discoveries at Stonehenge. It's a calendar. Now, it seems to me that's a hell of a structure to build to make a calendar. And also, why did they take stones all the way from the mountains in Wales, which would have to travel across the Severn Valley and everything? And I mean, and it's again, he even a guy as clued in as him, with now the ability to be able to speak for himself. He's off the BBC, was still locked into that that timeline. It's the same thing.
Yeah. Well, I think when you and I have had a couple of conversations and we talked about magic being like an inoculation, and I think it broadens your horizons to the point where you realize that nothing is what you thought it was, nothing is what you were taught it was, and there's an underlying story to everything, and you have to figure it out for yourself. But there's lots of clues lying around. I mean, you ferret out a lot of those clues. That's why I watch all your videos, because you're very good at ferreting out some of those clues. And I've discovered this last 3 years doing what I've been doing with this dowsing, just how weird reality actually is. There's a church which is now part of the City Museum. It's actually a church that was, well, it's a church. It's called John the Baptist Church. It's in a place called Jindřichův Hradec, which is west of Brno, about 100 kilometers or so. And we discovered that there were several very major energy lines coming in, and actually had a vortex in this church. Now, the church has some very mysterious and really quite creepy artwork from the 12th century or 13th century on the walls. And it's been the subject of a lot of documentaries in the Czech Republic. You know, it was a Templar church. This is a Templar mystery. These diagrams show where the Templar treasure is buried and all this sort of stuff. And we went there and we were dowsing the lines, and we found where the vortex was under the arch in the church where all these paintings are. And I happened to notice one grotesque image of a sort of fat, nude guy laid on his back, pointing, and all he wore was what looks to be a turban with a jewel about here. And I looked at the tile that he was pointing to, and it looked quite strange, and it reminded me of a sound pattern, a cymatic sound pattern. So I started comparing it with all the cymatic sound patterns I could find, and the best match was 852 hertz, I think, which is the solfeggio frequency that happens to correlate with the third eye chakra, right? So the next time we went back to the church, we took a tone generator and we meditated. My girlfriend and I sat there and we meditated, and the energy is amazing. If you feel like you're just floating and swimming in this energy. In fact, you can't stay in there for much longer than 10, 15 minutes. It begins to just, really turn your life around upside down and feels pretty uncomfortable. So I just put this, when nobody else was in the museum church bit, I switched on the tone generator. It was like switching a 100-watt amplifier on. Everything was magnified 100 times. And it almost felt like your head was going to blow off. The energy in that place was so amazing. And I started to look at some of the other designs, and I found another cymatic pattern for one of the other solfeggio frequencies. And we think there are 4 frequencies hidden in the artwork, because there's another character doing this in one of these pictures. So we think there are 4 frequencies. The problem is that some of the artwork is up in the arches, and you can't actually see, what the image next door is. So unfortunately, we're kind of stuck at 2 of the 4. But it's this kind of thing where, there's so much going on in that one historical place. There is so much going on. And it's these people, these Templars that built that church, they built it in a specific place for a specific purpose, and they left evidence on the wall of how to use it. And we've forgotten. And I think everything is sound anyway. In the beginning was the word. I think everything in the universe is sound. And again, we're back to frequencies, right? So we're again back to this idea of, as humans, we're able to sense so much of the frequency bandwidth, and there's so much more in each direction. So there's no need for different dimensions. Those dimensions exist right here alongside of us. They're just different vibrational states.
Yeah, about 5 years ago, myself and James Swaggart were making a film in Westcott at Longbarrow, just on a basic megalithic kind of thing. And I just said to him, I have a tone generator in my pocket. Maybe we'll get something out of this. It was actually in my phone. And it was a guitar tune. I got worked by producing a tone, a very simple one. But it was handy. So I just put it on A inside one of the antechambers inside the long barrel. And to say the sound it produced was nuts was an understatement. It went from being a continuous pitch to wah, 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 and increased in volume as I moved it around the antechamber. And I thought the phone in my hand was going to blow up. And we got it on camera. Unfortunately, the video has been lost. But there's definitely a sonic audiomancy, as we call it here, elements to a lot of this stuff that has not been fully explored. In fact, it's only people like yourself and myself by accident who usually stumble upon it.
Well, I think as we've said in the past, when you start to do the magical training and magical work, and you start being exposed to stuff, it just all of a sudden you just realize there's nothing I've ever been taught that I can actually believe in. Nothing. And you have to start and so people, I'm sure there are a bunch of people even watching this that will think I'm a complete lunatic, but I can assure you I'm not. I've really thought through a lot of this stuff, and I try to get other people to verify. And I can tell you that this dowsing gig is just extraordinary. Some of the things that happen. I mean, imagine you're driving in the countryside, and you just say to the person sat next to you, well, the male line seems to like tops of hills and oak trees. Oh, look, we're coming up on a flat bit at the top of a hill. Let's just stop and see. And you get out the car and you're actually in the line. And this thing's 90 paces wide. It's a pretty significant energy line. And I've gotten to the point where I don't need the sticks anymore. I can feel it. It vibrates within me, and I've tuned myself into it. And this is why I'm beginning to think that these energy lines are beginning to have some kind of an effect on my reality. I'm starting to expand my reality a little bit. That's with the butterflies and the feathers and the sort of weird synchronicities that seem to happen when you're out dowsing. And I know I'm not the only one, because I talk to people like Rory Duff and others that also do this dowsing stuff, and they have similar experiences. Somehow it seems to stretch and train your ability to see a broader bandwidth, I think. And then your whole reality starts to fall apart because you realize that you really do create the reality around you. I mean, it just becomes so obvious that this is what we're doing, but we've lost the ability. Now, that video that I sent you the other week, what struck me about that was that, and again, maybe you'll think I'm crazy, but if you're familiar at all with Franz Barton, who's a famous Czech magician who wrote several quite important books to some people, his sort of semi-fictional autobiography has the FOGC lodge in Nazi Germany with 100 members, etc., allocated demons. And when I first read that book when I was about 25, Frabato the Magician it's called, I thought, well, this is great yarn, wonderful imagination. But Thomas, the more things that are going on with COVID and wars and manipulation of reality, the more I believe that the cabal runs this planet, and they have the vast majority of the people on this planet well under control, hypnotically, sending them in all kinds of chaotic directions, feeding off their energy, and having them basically create a reality that they want, not what we want as individuals and as people. And it really disturbs me. So when I saw that video, which, just to explain, it took the Ukraine imagery with the blue and yellow flag for about the first 30 seconds and said, where have we seen these colors before? And then there's 19 minutes of images ranging from posters, advertisements, COVID buses, inoculation, vaccination buses, certificates, T-shirts. Every single image is in the same blue and yellow. What kind of manipulation is this? What does this really mean about our reality? Did you watch the video?
Yeah, and this is also these are the dark brotherhoods, the Black Brotherhood that Dion Fortune and Crowley told us about. Yeah. They weren't using metaphors. They were actually saying and she talks about shit that went down in Iona, where they were actually killing kids and stuff like that. And we're talking about hundreds of years ago, 100 years ago. Now, just quickly back to that subject of landing where you're supposed to land. When I was a teenager, I had no money, so I used to go cycling in the countryside forever. And I would turn down a lane and there was a high cross. I turned down another lane somewhere else, there was a mound. I turned down another lane, there was a holy well. Another lane, a dolmen. Another lane, a round tower. And it's not because, Ireland is full of this stuff, I know, but there are millions and millions of lanes. There's just could have been, the chance of there being a cowshed down there would be much more, 99 times more. But I would stumble upon a round tower or a high cross. And I was absolutely no doubt by a very early age that I was being brought to these places. I wasn't being brought to a cowshed or a milking barn or, a pigsty. I was being brought to a site. And it always seemed to happen that the end of this long country lane was something that was worth going to see without any signs or anything going for it, or an ancient monastic settlement. Yeah. So it goes to show you that that's how people navigated in the past. Yes. And these dark brotherhoods and so on, this yellow and blue thing. By the way, I had a very vivid dream of a blue flag, a yellow flag flying in a blue sky back just before Christmas, I think it was. And so, this is the whole thing that we, guys like us four here, because of our stepping into this stuff, we get a little bit more of a bandwidth of understanding it. And it comes through dreams and stuff like that, or even creativity. Sorry, Jason, you're going to say something.
Oh, I was also going to take it back to when Gary, you were talking about cymatics and frequencies. First thing, I think that's interesting too. You said it's 852 cycles per second, and that kind of being an octave above like the Verdi A, which is what, A431, I want to say. So half of 852 would be what, 426 or something like that. So again, like a really flat tuned, really low tuned A, which is always kind of where I've wanted to tune down, always tuning down to the 430s rather than around 440 or even going up to 442 or higher. But a story I wanted to tell you guys, a good friend of ours who's a medium, I would say, she's absolutely incredibly psychic. We were doing Say it? She's Romany. She's has incredible psychic ability, and we did a little bit of audiomancy with some analog gear and doing a little bit of taking a piece of electronics and going into self-oscillating range where we could bring the frequency up into the audible spectrum and then bring it down into sub-audible where we could hear the clicks and pops, but it was probably in like the 16 or less hertz or below 20 hertz, like things were just pop, 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 pop that low. And when we got to that point, before we started this, we'd sealed the room, done a banishing ritual, and treated it in a ritual sense. And while we got down into the sub hearing, so the sub 20 hertz area, our friend saw a black figure. A man. I don't even know if it was black. I'm dubbing that part in, but she saw a man in the room. I want to say he was a shadowy figure, is what she told me afterwards, months later. But it was only after we'd gone from up in the audible spectrum and the self-resonance on this piece of gear and brought it down into sub-frequency, crossing that threshold there, she saw something and it freaked her out pretty bad. And we're
all turning it up. We're like, oh yeah.
Yeah, we were having a good time with it. And it's just like, oh yeah, you hear this? And we're focused on the sound that it was making, but we're like, oh yeah. And it's pretty good. But no, it freaked her out real good. But we told her we're doing this show. We're going to send this over to her later this evening once it's uploaded. But I wanted to give her a shout out without naming any names. But yeah, it was just a real interesting experience with crossing over that audible to inaudible threshold and then some sort of entity appearing or some sort of, whether it's a thought form or an actual disincarnate entity or something there watching, that somehow that crossed it over into her ability, wherever her perception range is there, where she's tuned to.
Yeah. Well, these liminal people, when I started talking to sort of magical people that I know about them, a lot of them said, oh yeah, I've seen them, because there was a friend of mine who unfortunately passed away about this time last year, Sue Vincent, and she ran a school in the UK, a magical school in the UK with two gentlemen. And she and one of them, Stuart France, would do this work in churches and things at weekends, looking at the hidden artistry and what it might mean from an esoteric perspective, and also working with the earth energies and things, but in a slightly different way. And she said, that they'd been to one of these circles, stone circles, a group of them, and met this person who talked to them at length about the circle and how pleased he was that they were there and would be working with the circle in the way that it was originally intended. And of course, he just disappeared too, because he was another liminal person, and they thought he was the guardian of the circle, perhaps, that they'd tuned into. So, I mean, that's just one example. I could give you many, many other examples of these liminal people. They're not always nasty, fearful, dark shadows and horrible things. They can be at the other end of the frequency and be, very informative and very loving entities as well.
Now, do you happen to notice more of these liminal beings when you're closer to intersections of energy lines or grid lines of any sort? Like as if there's an IO there, an in-out of some sort?
I wouldn't say for me that was true. I would say that it happens to me when I'm in a certain... I get into this sort of state, and I would describe it as a meditational state, but probably a different frequency wavelength to an actual meditation when I'm dowsing. And that's when I start to notice all of these strange people and strange things, synchronicities, etc. happening. I think that the vortexes where the lines cross, and Rory Duff, I don't know if you've come across Rory, but if you haven't, he might be someone you want to talk to as well. Because Rory is a fellow geologist like me, but he's been doing earth energy work and dowsing for many, many years. And he's come up with a whole theory based on physics as to what these energy lines are. There's different types, but he says that, or he believes that essentially many of the lines are due to the interaction between the molten and the solid core of the Earth. And the nickel ion acts as a transducer and turns sort of vibration into low frequency sound waves. And he thinks that what these are is very low frequency sound waves. He's classified them into different types, and they go from emperor dragons, which are the very, very big lines, through the type 4, which is the line that we're chasing here in the Czech Republic. And you would have quite a few in the UK and Ireland. As I say, the Michael and Mary lines being one good example, all the way down to very narrow lines that are very, almost everywhere. But where these lines cross, they form a vortex, and those vortices, in Rory's idea, is that the Templars had discovered the Grail in Jerusalem, not a cup, a physical cup, but the idea that these vortices, or these energy centers where these lines cross, form these sound shapes. And this sound shape would be shaped like a cup or a spear or whatever. So this Grail legend maybe came from the ancient people using these energies to basically help them shape and create reality in a certain way. And I fear that this knowledge is still around, but it's being used by the cabal to shape things in a way that we wouldn't want to go. And so, my part, I think why I'm being guided and why I'm being sort of driven to do this is partly to try to reawaken people to the fact that these earth energies are very important and that they can and should be utilized for spiritual purposes. That they are, the very large emperor dragons where they cross, that is really the holy grail of the place you want to go meditate. So Rory's actually building a website where he's trying to identify as many of these places as he can and build discussion groups and get groups of people to go to these places and meditate certain things during what he calls the right periods. There are 4 periods a year, he thinks, around the equinox solstice time frame when the energy is really synchronized and can be used very, very effectively. And it makes a lot of sense to me. And having meditated in one of these vortices of a type 4 level line, and even done the sound in that particular environment at Jindřichův, I can never say it right, Jindřichův Hradec, I can vouch for the fact that it's an incredible experience. And I think the more people that we can get to go and meditate in these areas on the right sort of things, the better it will be for humanity as a whole. And I think that we're talking about history's being rewritten. I think that the ancients knew this. I think they absolutely knew this. I think they could sense these lines. They could follow these lines. They didn't need dowsing rods, and they saw them. I'll give you, there's a Slavic archaeological site down on the border with Austria called Mikulčice, and I've made a couple of videos about it because there's the whole sort of settlement, maybe 10, 15,000 people, has more or less been revealed archaeologically. And it's quite a small settlement, but there's like 12 churches there. And I couldn't figure out, why do you need 12 churches, even next door to each other? And when I went there and started dowsing, what I discovered was a whole series of energy lines flowing through the site. And each church was aligned with an energy line straight down the aisle. And the cathedral, the bigger church, the supposed cathedral, was sited on a crossing of 4 of these lines. So there's a museum in one of the other towns down there, and they've built the museum around another Slavic church from the 11th century. The foundation and even the skeleton's still buried there in the museum. You can walk around it. I took out my dowsing rods, and of course there's an energy line running straight down the aisle. Every single Slavic church I've ever visited, and I've visited a lot, has an energy line running down its aisle. So I'm convinced that the Slavs, for one, knew about these lines, could sense them or see them, and deliberately oriented their lives and existence around them and using them positively.
Well, I can tie that into what Jason was asking about the crossroads things, because if you go around rural, nearly always Catholic countries, because Catholicism is where paganism basically survived anyway. Yeah. So you go to Ireland, Spain, Portugal, southern Italy. Every so often you come to the crossroads of country roads and there's a statue of the Virgin Mary at the crossroads. Now that statue of the Virgin Mary was originally Hecate, the goddess of magic at the crossroads. And then they replaced it later on with the Virgin Mary. Now those crossroads are definitely considered locally to be meeting points between this reality and the other world. And this made its way into African Caribbean Creole culture, where New Orleans, where Jason is very interested in the Robert Johnson song Crossroads, where he meets the devil at the crossroads. And it's probably a Pan type figure or something like that. But so those roads were probably built, the ones that have the statues of the Virgin Mary today, were probably built at intersections of those lines. And that's probably why the road is built along that way. Maybe it was considered a safer path for travelers or something like that. Like you wouldn't be attacked by wild animals if you went along this certain particular path, following this ley line or this underground path or whatever. But that's true, Jason. At the intersections of those roads, they are considered very sacred and magical places. And there's just one just up the road from me, in a very beautiful place called the Clare, a very tranquil sort of classic Irish countryside, rolling green hills and stuff. But the crossroads has a beautiful energy about it. And there's the little status, the shrine of the Virgin in there. And that would have been Hecate in the past, or some other Celtic goddess, Minerva or someone. But there you go. They knew very well at these crossing nodes that they were at those meeting points were definitely, the amplification of the other world and this world was increased.
I can give you a really good example of a Czech site where the Catholic overtook the pagan side, but you can still see it. It's a place called Svatý Hostín. It's at the top of a hill. It's south of Brno, and it's a place of Marian pilgrimage, and has been for many, many years. In fact, it's rather horrible because it's got all of those cheap stalls selling statues of cheap plaster statues and all that kind of thing that the Catholics go in for. But on top of the hill is this rather beautiful Gothic type church. And halfway down the hill is another smaller church and a natural spring. And when I went there, before I started dowsing, I could sense that the energy was really strong. And I thought perhaps it was because of the water, because of the spring. But all of the imagery there shows the Virgin Mary stood on a quarter moon, and she's holding a little baby Jesus, and the little baby Jesus is throwing a lightning bolt out at the earth. And I was thinking, well, why would you show Jesus as like a Zeus? Why would you do that? So I started to do some research and discovered that the place is associated with a bit of a myth. When the Hungarian armies started to invade into this part of the world in, I think it was the 1500s time frame, this massive Mongol army arrived at Svatý Hostín, and the local populace, of course, were very afraid they were all going to be massacred. So they prayed to their god, and a miracle occurred. A big storm blew up, lightning was thrown at the army was dispersed, and this miracle occurred according to the people. Well, the aristocrats were Christian, but the people were pagan. So the aristocrats said that this was the Virgin Mary had saved them, and the pagan ordinary people said, no, we saw the lightning, it was Perun, the god of the skies. And so what you've got in this imagery is the two things captured to suit both parties.
And that's the Dark Brotherhood. Another example of that is Fatima. Those three kids saw a 3-foot tall rotating being that made them a clockwork noise that had no head, that had no hair. And the Jesuits immediately took it over, killed 2 of the kids, took Lucia into a convent for the rest of her life, and said the children had seen the Virgin Mary. The children had not seen. They were very specific. They saw a 3-foot spinning entity rotating around near a cave. And there was nothing at all to do with the Virgin. That was purely an overstory by the aristocrats in Portugal.
Yeah, and I think that it was a Slavic site before it was a Christian site, and the Christians just did what they always did. They just hijacked it and replaced it. But in this instance, some of the symbolism survived. And yeah, I could go on and on about that place. It's really amazing. It's actually another crossing site on this temple alignment of the two type 4 lines. And we've named one of the lines Perun and the other one Merkosh. Perun is the male god of the skies, and Merkosh is the earth, fertile, damp goddess.
It's interesting. We've been talking about the crossing of lines, and I brought this up on a few other shows, but here in Richland, Washington, Kennewick, and Pasco, it's called the Tri-Cities, and where we live here, it's on the crossing of 3 rivers. There's the Columbia right over here to the east of us, the Snake, and the Yakima. And I would imagine that those 3 rivers are pulled together by some sort of energy line. And we've both felt a vortex just north of here, where it's like time gets distorted, the sense of direction gets distorted. We end up driving past things that we don't want to drive past. And it's kind of right in the middle, I would say, of where. Anyway, there's some sort of crossing point here. I haven't ever dowsed before. I don't think she has either, but it'd be one of those things that we should probably learn how to do that and make a documentary about it here. And then just recently discovered over there in the Columbia River across the street here in Richland, they found this gigantic 70-foot cavern. Just drops right down, incredibly deep, right here in the Columbia, right basically in front of us. But I would imagine, that there's something that pulls these energy lines together.
There's a lot of very strong energy lines in North America. Unfortunately, when I lived there, I wasn't interested in it because I lived in Texas for about 14, 15 years, 16 years, I think, something like that, Houston.
Well, the meetings of the water is a very esoteric thing. Where the city of Turin, which we know is called, the church calls it one of the gateways to hell, mainly because the people who run that city don't like the Catholic Church and throw them out, basically thrown them out. And it's actually one of the nicest cities in Europe too. But that's a confluence of 3 rivers also as well. And, so that's probably one of the most esoteric places in the world,
And the other thing about our site is this is where they did the enrichment of the uranium to make plutonium for the bomb. That's why this community exists. So right up the road, there's the Hanford facility where there's still nuclear reactors there, but that's where they made all the plutonium for the bomb. So there's strange synchronicities here. They also found 12,000-year-old remains of a Caucasian male in Kennewick, not too far. So that's what I'm saying. It'd behoove us to learn how to douse and get out there and map out. I download that app you were talking about, and should get a set of.
Do it. It opens up a whole new world. And what I think I've discovered is, like I say, nothing is what it seems. There's something. This last few years has just been one con after another. And
just like you were saying, about these sites attracting not only the dark brotherhoods, but also people like us who may be the ones, we're kind of like the fly in their ointment. That could be what Jason and Timony are doing with the atomic people in where they live, the atomic wars where energy was developed by the dark brotherhoods. And the reason why they live there and are fascinated by this stuff is that's their calling, what you want to call it, their amplification towards it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just had an EVP there occur right after you said that, Thomas.
But yeah, I've been to Czech Republic. I've not explored it properly, and I want to. And of course, it's a part of the world that everybody has these stereotypes about, Rudolph II and the Holy Roman Empire, the Alchemical Kingdom, and what's his name? Kelly and Dee being there, and the whole mystique surrounding that.
Well, the funny thing is John Dee and Edward Kelly, when they weren't in Prague, they were down in this part of the Czech Republic, staying in some castle. And I suspect that what we're going to find out is that castle where Kelly and Dee resided and did their alchemical work is on the Templar line.
There's also another town I can't remember the name of it. It's on the Austrian border. It's heading south from Prague. And Kelly and Dee were involved in this small town as well. They actually were doing rituals down there. I'll get the name, but it has like a difficult, I find the Czech language very difficult to remember.
You and
I don't know
both.
how you manage. No, but I will get the name of that town for you. And interesting enough, just south of it, across the Austrian border, literally down straight, is a very mysterious megalith that no one knows its origins. So here we go again. You know, these things aren't happening by accident.
I didn't know about that. I'd be interested to go and have a look at that, because there's not much in terms of stone circles in this part of the world, or megaliths. The only thing I've found is called Kral of Stool. It's the King's Table. It's by Vellerad, but it's debatable whether it's a natural rock formation or a real dolmen circle thing.
I was talking to a chap from Poland who lives here, and he's mad into megaliths as well. He said a lot of them were destroyed in World War II. They were in Eastern Europe. They were used for everything, even for like tank artillery practice. They've seen a megalith, they would fire both sides. The Russians and the Germans would fire at the megalith. So a lot were destroyed in the war. He was telling me that like his grandfather told him that before the war there was a lot more megaliths in Poland, and they were wrecked in the war. But yeah, but this thing is just over the border in Austria. I'll get the name for you. It's a very bizarre mound, but it's almost very vertical looking. It's not like, it doesn't have a long slope sides like they do in, say, England, where the mounds are more gentle. This thing kind of goes like this, like that kind of thing. But I'll get that for you. But I think that those guys would have been guided by these energies they were following. They wouldn't have picked up a map and says, let's follow this road. And I think if there is a way of, and I'm getting a bit like, not going off topic, but I'm getting a bit like philosophical here. I'm more and more convinced, and I bet you are too, Gary, that the longer we live and the longer we're involved in these processes, that it's this unconscious knowing, following these energies, following these hunches, following these hints, following these sensations, has always led us to something that was very, very valuable for us personally in surviving the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. Yeah. And if we are to form a resistance or an uprising or an insurgency against the dark cabals, it's actually stuff we're doing here, because we're amplifying, bring that word again, a heightened sense of awareness towards energy work. That is the only method of overcoming what they're throwing at us, because it's the only battlefield we can actually fight them one-on-one on.
Yeah, agreed. And if you take up dowsing and following energy lines, I can promise you that you will go places that otherwise you would never have gone. You will discover things that are absolutely amazing, well-kept secrets, and you will look at things that you've seen all your life and realize that the history as told officially is complete bunkum, and that there's a different story to the place altogether. And
it's been leaked to us in fiction and stories. And like I as a young kid, I loved the Dennis Wheatley novels, and I was reading these as a kid and saying, "This is all real. This is not fiction." You know, these aristocrats really are meeting in these houses and doing these things. And lo and behold, we find that is true. And we also and his book Strange Conflict, which is 1941, he talks about a war in the astral realms between the Germans and the British and the Americans. And this was long before The Men Who Stared at the Goats came out, but it was told in fiction that's their whole thing. They have to tell us, and it's up to you to be smart enough to figure out what they're actually up to. This is why. What's his name? Rudolf Steiner was convinced the Vrilya book, The Coming of the Power Race, was not fiction and it was actual fact, that there was these angelic beings living in the inner earth. And it's just, and that's probably tied up with the late, that's why the Third Reich are obsessed with all these energy paths and everything as well. We're told through fiction. We're told through things that, it's just a bit of fun, it's a bit spooky, it's not real. It's a bit of a laugh. But then you have stage magicians who do tricks that are like, holy shit, there's no way that was a stage trick. They've done something. Like I've told them this thing before, that David Copperfield, I know a guy who was there when he made the Statue of Liberty disappear. And he said, the statue of Thomas, the statue, and this is a guy who'd be like a hard ass, like Brooklyn guy. And, you know, Tommy, it definitely fucking disappeared, man. You know, and he said he saw the stars and aircraft flying behind where the Statue of Liberty should have been. And then lo and behold, it turned out that Copperfield has the largest collection of occult books in the world.
Well, I mentioned the Czech guy, Franz Barden. And he started his life as a stage magician in Bavaria and Czechoslovakia at the time. And if you read Frabato the Magician, not only was he a very good hypnotist, but he also claimed that the tricks that he did on stage were real magic.
Yeah, I believe that. I think that is the actual ultimate trick of stage magic, is some of those bastards are doing the real thing. Yeah, I really do know. I know that for a fact it's true, yeah.
Great.
Did you say you want to say something, Jason?
Oh no, that was just I was making a note down of Frabato the Magician with Franz Bardon. I want to take
Franz Barden, yeah.
Yeah.
Listen, okay, so we got another show after this. We're not rushing it out. I think we've done an hour by now, have we?
Oh, we've done an hour, yeah. We've probably done an hour.
So, Gary, before you go, hit us with what's happening, what you're doing, what's next, and where people can get your books.
Well, I can get my books on any Amazon site, of course. G. Michael Vasey is my kind of name that I use for the books. At the moment, what I'm really interested in is tracking this major energy line across the Czech Republic and unraveling the mysteries of some of the places along it, which seem to all have a common Templar connection, which is why we called it the Templar alignment. And if there are people watching that live in this part of the world, I really would like to get a group of people together to do some of this meditational work and just basically work together. So I have a website called earthmagicbrunner.com, and you can track our progress there, or you can go to the YouTube channel where I post videos sort of showing what we're doing and what progress we're making, and also talking about some of the synchronicities and weird things that happen along the way. And I suspect there'll be a couple more books probably. I met this rather remarkable Czech lady who is really into this stuff as well. So we're kind of partnering on it, and I hope we'll write some books together. So
Brilliant.
That will be my next project.
Brilliant. And now that travel and stuff is opening up, I'd like to do a film. We'd like to do a film with you probably at some point on the dowsing thing in the Czech Republic. So down the road.
Yeah, no problem. Come and see me. I'll be happy to show you around, show you some of these sites and places. Let's see what you think.
Yeah, because we want to do something in Crowley and D in the Czech Republic at some point down the road. So great, that'll be great fun. And we'll have you back on here again. Jason will put the addresses of your website underneath there. So listen, Gary, outstanding, fantastic. I really enjoyed this show. I could talk for another 2 hours, but like I said, we have another show coming up. Best of luck, and please come back.
Thanks,
Gary,
we'll do
so nice
anytime.
to meet you. Thank you so much
Likewise.
for spending. You gave me so much to think about. It was brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Yeah, cheers. Have a good evening or day or whatever. And I'll keep watching you guys. It's good. Good work.
And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to Beyond Room 313 Symposium. And we'll see you next time. And, thanks for tuning in. The channel is doing really well, and it's because of you guys, and more of this fantastic kind of program to come. All the best.